Welcome to class, everyone. Settle in because today's explainer is going to serve as a comprehensive study guide exploring the incredibly complex, layered history of the Winyah Bay area in South Carolina. We're going to look at this region not just as some spot on a map, but as a deeply dynamic theater of human triumph, brutal conflict, and sweeping historical change. So let's jump right in.
Here's our syllabus for today's explainer. We'll start with 1. The indigenous Winyah tribe, 2. A thriving maritime hub, 3. Escaping Winyah Bay, 4. Shipwrecks of George County, and wrap up with 5. Legacy of the Lowcountry.
All right, Module 1. The indigenous Winyah tribe, our first inhabitants.
Let's open our first module by looking at the Winyah tribe. They were a Native American group of the southeastern woodlands, and honestly, the exact origin of their name is this fascinating puzzle for linguists. To start, we need to define the Winyah geographically and linguistically. They were a Catawban-speaking people situated right near Winyah Bay, the Black River, and the lower course of the PD River. Now, what's incredibly interesting here is that historical records suggest they were present during the very first European expeditions to the region. Anthropologists and linguists actually believe the name Winyah corresponds to the Yeni hole described in early 16th century Spanish accounts, specifically following Lucas Vázquez de Ayllón's expedition to the Carolinas way back in 1526. And, tragically, our academic sources note it's highly possible that members of the tribe were captured and enslaved by the Spanish during this early period.
I definitely want you to take notes on this timeline, class, because it paints a really stark picture of how rapidly the tribe was displaced through colonial conflicts. Following initial European settlement, the tribe actually interacted and allied with English colonists down in Charlestown. But that relationship was totally shattered in 1683 when European slavers deliberately instigated a war against the Winyah. Why? Simply as an excuse to capture them as slaves. By 1715, they actually refused pressure from the Cheraw to join the Yamasee War against the colonists. But the mounting pressure from colonial expansion triggered distinct migration patterns, forcing them to move in 1718 to join the Cape Fear Indians. The very last certain record we have of the Winyah people appears on a 1752 map, placing them between the Black River and PD River. Anthropologists suspect they might have eventually merged with the nearby Waccamaw, but their ultimate fate? It remains an unsolved historical mystery.
And this primary data point right here, from 1715, shows just how devastating those early colonial encounters really were. Prior to the Yamasee War, the total Winyah population was recorded as being reduced to just 106 individuals, living in a single village. 106. It's a sobering number that really grounds our understanding of indigenous displacement in the area.
Moving right along to Module 2, a thriving maritime hub, commerce on Winyah Bay.
Let's shift our focus to see how Georgetown and Winyah Bay evolved from those early colonial days into a massive, critical node of antebellum commerce. You can visualize the economic engine of this region just by looking at these primary commodities. We're talking about serious wealth here. Some of the absolute richest families in North America in the years prior to the Civil War lived in the Georgetown area. Every single year, fleets of vessels from New England would sail down to haul these goods to markets in Charleston and New York. Rice was, of course, a massive export, but the lumbering business was just as vital. The industrializing Northeast required massive amounts of southern hard pine for bridges, wharves, and shipbuilding, along with the turpentine, pine tar, pitch, and rosin that were extracted from it.
But here was the logistical nightmare. Winyah Bay's passage to the sea was incredibly crooked, super difficult to navigate, and only 7.5 feet deep at low tide. Deep draft European ships? Utterly impractical. They just get stuck. So the crucial point is how the colonists adapted. They actually learned from the local Native Americans how to use dugout crafts made from the plentiful bald cypress trees. These were then modified into flat-bottom barges called periaguas. Framed with live oak and wide pine planks, a large periagua could transport over 100 barrels of rice, with each barrel weighing 560 pounds, and still navigate those shallow waters with ease. It's just a perfect example of indigenous technology directly enabling colonial commerce.
All right, Module 3, Escaping Winyah Bay, the Maritime Underground Railroad. Now, in this module, we need to examine a profoundly important counter-narrative. To understand why enslaved people took such immense, life-threatening risks to flee this bustling maritime environment, we have to look at primary sources. Specifically, things like these WPA narratives which were gathered in the 1930s from formerly enslaved individuals. These academic sources document the severe, omnipresent terror of forced family separations. Respondents detailed the horror of long-distance sales where family members were forced to stand on tree stumps to be auctioned off to speculators, literally never to be seen again.
This unimaginable anguish provides the absolutely crucial context for the extreme lengths freedom seekers would go to escape Winyah Bay.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer resourcefulness of the resistance. The very same shipping lanes and maritime industries used to export those massive hauls of rice and lumber, they became an invisible underground network. Clandestine associations of African-American watermen, stevedores, and swampers, and sometimes aided by poorly paid white boatmen, used water transportation to smuggle runaways. They would hide them right in the hulls of schooners or rowed them across the bays in the dead of night, delivering freedom seekers up the Carolina coast and entirely bypassing the bounty hunters who were waiting on land.
I really want you to consider this incredible primary source account from a man named Peter Burns. In 1833, Burns bravely swam 9 miles across Winyah Bay to escape bondage. 9 miles! From there, he walked 900 miles north to New York. When he was later asked how he managed not to drown during that staggering 9-mile swim, he simply replied, "The Lord held the water back like he did for Moses." It is a stunning testament to the sheer human will to be free.
Which brings us to Module 4, Shipwrecks of George County, Submerged History.
Class, for this module, we are literally diving into the archaeological records resting at the muddy bottom of the bay to look at the anatomy of a Civil War sinking. Because the waters here are practically a museum of submerged history. Picture this. On February 17, 1865, Admiral John Dahlgren of the U.S. Navy officially receives Georgetown's surrender and declares freedom for all enslaved people in the county. His flagship, the USS Harvest Moon, is anchored right there in Winyah Bay. But that very same evening, 2 Confederate soldiers are hiding upstairs in the local Kaminsky hardware shop, packing mines with gunpowder. Under the cloak of darkness, they row out and weight these floating torpedoes exactly 2 feet under the water's surface. Just a few days later, on March 1st, the Harvest Moon strikes one of those mines. A massive hole is blown in the hull, and the ship goes down in just 5 minutes.
But the reason we still talk about this specific wreck today is encapsulated by this number, 12. The USS Harvest Moon sank in just 12 feet of water. Entombed in the local pluff mud, the top of its smokestack remains visibly protruding above the bay's surface to this very day. It's a permanent, physical reminder of that historical event just sitting right out there in the water.
But wait, let's move to another remarkable find, one that actually takes us way back to our discussion of colonial commerce, the Brown's Ferry vessel. Discovered in 1970 by local divers, this unidentified transport ship dates all the way back to circa 1730. When they found it, it was still fully laden with 25 tons of plantation bricks. After years of careful preservation, it is officially recognized as the oldest recovered wooden vessel in America. It functions as a perfectly preserved time capsule, showing us exactly how those early local boat builders constructed their vessels to navigate these incredibly challenging waters.
Finally, Module 5, Legacy of the Low Country, Layered Memories.
To conclude today's lecture, let's just reflect on how Winyah Bay is so much more than a geographic feature on a map. From the indigenous Winyah tribe whose name the bay still bears, to the booming rice and lumber fleets, the exceptionally brave souls swimming for their freedom, and the war-torn wreckage still sleeping in the mud today, it is a living, profoundly layered archive of our past. I'll dismiss the class with this final question for your independent study. When you look out over a bay or a river, what other forgotten chapters of human history might still lie buried just beneath the surface of the pluff mud, waiting for us to uncover them? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.